Today's guest reminds us that heroism doesn't begin with applause, it begins with choice. Clarence Singleton is a United States Marine Corps veteran of the Vietnam War and a Purple Heart recipient whose life has been shaped by service long after the uniform come off. After Vietnam, Clarence rebuilt his life in New York, joining the fire department of New York City and spending more than 2 decades running towards danger while others ran away. And when the towers fell on September 11th, despite no longer being on duty, Clarence put on his gear and went to ground zero anyway. Not because he had to, but because it was who he was. He later told that story in the heart of a hero, not to relive trauma, but to preserve its meaning. Clarence, welcome to Voice for Valor. Before we get into your background and we talk about Vietnam or 9/11, I want to start here. How do you define service?
I believe that service is the rent we pay for the privilege of being a U.S. citizens. And I think that all of us need to serve in some respect, whatever your choice, make America better.
When you look across your life, Marine, firefighter, author, what part of you has never changed?
The love of people, Mike. The jobs that I've had, the things that I've done was all in support of and helping people. For years, I asked myself, Clarence, why would you run into burning buildings to save others, people that you don't even know? And it took me some time to come up with the answer, but that is for the love of them. I want to see everyone do well. So if need to sacrifice myself and put my life on the line to save others, then it's all worth it.
Where did that come from? Is that something that your parents taught you, grandparents? Where did that process?
It could be from parents. I was just thinking earlier this morning. I grew up in South Carolina, and my mother it was a nice family. We were very poor, but we had morals and values. And I could hear my mother saying, treat people well, always respect people. And also, one thing she would say is respect your elders, and as well as if you can't say something nice about a person, don't say anything at all. So I think it was probably instilled in me as growing up,
Where
because
in
I'm a
South
kid.
Carolina did you grow up?
Sumter, South Carolina.
Sumter.
Yep. SUMTR. That doesn't have anything to do with Fort Sumter.
I was going to say, is that close to Charleston? Because
No.
there's some pretty significant stories that go down from Fort Sumter.
Yeah. That's near the Charleston area of Fort Sumter. But the person that discovered our town was General Sumter.
Okay.
Mhm.
I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is very close to the border. So I
Yeah.
just didn't know, geographically speaking, where you were in location
Mhm.
from in the
Right.
South Carolina area. You were very young when you went to Vietnam. What did that experience teach you about fear?
Well, fear. It's as a matter of fact, I was in my days they termed it the outstanding Marine. Out of my unit in Paris Island, I was the number one Marine, and I went to Vietnam. And I felt fearful on several occasions, but it's doing what you need to do in spite of fear. And even after the war, there's some things in civilian life now that I'm afraid of doing, but I do it anyway because fear, lots of time, we call it false. It's false. And it's appearing real, but it's false. And I just go ahead and do whatever I have to do. And after I'm on the other side, I said, wow, that wasn't bad at all. I was creating this illusion that what was going to happen, and it didn't happen as ugly as I thought it was. So even now, I don't let fearful things or things that I deem as being fearful affect me. I just go ahead and do what I have to do.
I have school-age children right now, a senior in high school and a freshman in high school, and I feel like that word fear has almost transitioned into anxiety. My
Oh, yeah.
kids always are talking about this anxiety that they're dealing with, and I feel like it was fear when I was growing up. I'm 50 years old. I know you're a little bit older than I am, but In my day, the word anxiety never came up. It was
Right.
always fear,
Right.
which it's essentially the fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And so always trying to tell them, you really don't know.
Right.
You're anxious, you're fearful, but you don't know until you try.
Exactly.
My eldest son, my wife forced him to wrestle. He tears, did not want to wrestle, did not want to be part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he started going to wrestling practice, he said, okay, I'll do the practice, but I don't want to do any meets, any competitions.
Right.
And then eventually started doing competitions. And then this is his senior year. So we just went to his senior night and had a chance to walk out on the mats. They introduce him, they introduce me and my wife,
Mm-hmm.
and say nice things about Zach and where he's headed next year. And he was so excited to get on the mat and wrestle that night. And
Right.
I just kept thinking, Zach,
Right.
if it wasn't for your mom forcing you into this, you wouldn't have had this experience.
Right.
So when your parents provide you some sort of guidance,
Right.
rather than always fighting back about the
Right.
anxiety or the fear,
Right. Mm-hmm.
perhaps those elder people in your life actually know a little more than you give them credit to.
You know, Mike, I was with the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines in Vietnam. Very tough unit. As a matter of fact, of the 2 dog tags that were issued, it was mandatory. One around your neck and one laced in your boots. Probably know the reason
I know,
for that.
but please share with share with our guests.
Yeah, that's because if you're blown apart in parts, they can identify you. And after going through all of this, some days, especially during the monsoon, the choppers can't come in to drop food and even to pick you up if you get injured or wounded. But at the end of my tour, I was going to volunteer to do another tour of duty in Vietnam. And the Marines stayed 13 months. I think the other branches stayed 12. But I had gotten over the fear. I become used to it, accustomed to fighting, and living in hardship. It's amazing what the human body can adapt to. And I met one of my friends that I went to high school with. I told him, I said, I'm going to stay here for another tour. He said, Clarence, get out of here and go home. But I had no choice because I was wounded shortly after that, and they extracted me out of the war.
You're a very physically fit man, and I know that you joined in Vietnam at a very young age. What made you choose the Marines?
Well, for years, I would say because there was a guy at our high school. He went in the Marine Corps. I was a senior. And he went into the Marine Corps and he came back. Boy, he was one of the football players for our high school, Lincoln High School in South Carolina. And he was built and he was looking good in a uniform. So I said, yeah, that's what I want. So while I was in high school, a Marine Corps recruiter came to the school and I went in there to talk to him. So I enlisted. As a matter of fact, some years later, I started getting paid. And I looked at my check. I said, from the time I became active, I don't deserve this amount of pay, but they went back to the time I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
Now, the real life example is I didn't find out until a long time after coming back from Vietnam. I grew up in a poor family. So going into the Marine Corps and doing my best and come out being a tough Marine, now I am somebody below the level of consciousness. This is going on. And I didn't realize that until years later. As a matter of fact, after the World Trade Center, by talking to a therapist. And then another problem I had with Vietnam, I used to, Christmas and New Year's, I didn't verbalize it, but I would say to myself, people tell me, Clarence, Happy New Year's, Merry Christmas. And I would say to myself, I don't want to hear that stuff. I'd grumble inside. So finally, one day after September 11, I was talking to the therapist, and she said, Clarence, no wonder you feel that way. You were wounded December 23rd in Vietnam. You lost buddies. And I was like, oh, okay. From that moment on, I started feeling better about Christmas. As a matter of fact, I started wearing a little red Santa's cap every year. Yeah. But I had a breakthrough, just by talking to someone. And I think that's important for us to share things with people, no matter how much we think it's going to hurt us, it might help someone else.
I love the fact that you mentioned one of your high school peers that you looked up to, and he came home looking fit in his uniform. So many folks don't realize that sometimes you got to leave home to grow, to grow up. I don't think I would have the level of confidence that I have today if I would have never left my hometown and tried something different. What about you? Did you ever have that moment? I mean, you mentioned Christmas, you mentioned some of the reflection because of you being injured. When you came home, at what point did you realize I'm a different man?
Actually, Mike, other people brought that to my attention. And I can remember my sister saying, me and another Marine, we were talking, and she said, wow, you guys, your voices even changed, because a Marine called boot camp, they make you yell and scream. And also, people look up to you. It's like, here is Clarence, he's my Marine. Now, also, there's a negative side to that also. They look at you like you're not balanced anymore mentally. And so you have to go through that challenge also, because you fought in a war, people think you're psychologically out of it, which isn't so. I mean, wars can cause some of us to lose it, but for the most part, I know that I'm still mentally capable and fit. And so, as I was just sharing a couple of days ago, and people lately have said a lot of great things about me. And I don't necessarily need it for self validation, but I like to hear them say nice things about me. And it just tells me, oh, okay, that's how I'm present myself to them. So stay on that course.
Earlier, you mentioned being injured. You were ready to volunteer for a second tour in Vietnam, and you mentioned being injured. Receiving the Purple Heart, I believe,
Yes.
it's obviously an honor, but it comes at a cost. How did you carry that cost forward?
For years, Mike, we were a special breed of guys also. When we came home from Vietnam, we couldn't talk about it because we were ridiculed and they called us names. Guys couldn't get jobs and things like that. So I hid the fact for a long time that I had a Purple Heart just to keep from being criticized and ridiculed by people. Only in the past few years now that I have Purple Heart license plates on my vehicles. All of my caps have a little Purple Heart pinned on them. And I think it's a badge of honor. It shows that for all of us guys that we went through hardships for the country. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. So I wear it proudly now. And it's one of the highest medals. Don't quote me, but I think it's the third one down now. It used to be the highest, but then a few more came in. So.
How many of your colleagues from your time in Vietnam do you still communicate with?
Hardly, actually none. There were two guys. I was at the hospital, VA hospital in Brooklyn, and had a picnic for the veterans. So I said, I'm going to wear one of my Fox 29 shirt with the patch on it so somebody could recognize me if anyone there was from the unit. And two guys did. They came with, hey, we were with Fox 29, and we remained friends for a long, long time. But we weren't in the unit at the same time. One was from New York. Oh, both of them were from New York. Yeah, because we were at the Veterans Hospital. Yeah, and but one has since passed away, Vietnam-related causes, and the other one is still living, but he's down in, I think, Atlanta or someplace like that. But I've never really contacted anyone from Vietnam. Also, sometimes you just don't want to know. I was in Vietnam. I was with the 27th Marines, and the 27th Marines came back to the States. So guys like myself who didn't have enough time in Vietnam, they sent us up north to the DMZ. So I ended up in Quang Tri, Providence, LZ Stud, also known as Camp Vanderbilt. And I wrote Scott a letter because we'd separated, and he answered it. And I answered his, and he didn't reply. So I stopped. I didn't want to know, if he was living or dead. And that's what happened to me with a lot of guys. I just didn't want to follow through because I didn't want pain of knowing that they suffered. Because that was one of the reasons I wanted to stay in Vietnam. I told you earlier, I didn't want to leave my buddies, because I knew they would be going through hardships.
I know we talk about a lot of the dark times in military and our experiences, but at the same time, I don't think we talk enough about the resilience and how much you're willing to endure as you continue on through life. There's times that I look back at my military experience, which nothing it pales in comparison to yours from a combat perspective, but I do remember specific times where I was flying 24-hour mission after 24-hour mission after 24-hour mission and thinking to myself, the level of exhaustion of me flying these missions.
Mhm.
On that third consecutive day of flying these 24-hour missions, we're getting ready to land, and I just started crying.
Mhm.
And some of the guys I was flying with were like, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just crying
Mhm.
because of that exhaustion." Well,
Mhm.
now when I look at these days where I'm having a tough day or I'm having a hard week or I'm having a long day,
Mhm.
like, hey, I haven't cried yet. So I know that I've got a lot more down inside that can
Yeah.
handle
Oh,
this.
yeah. Mhm.
You mentioned, coming home from Vietnam. I know that the war doesn't end, but what helped you rebuild when the uniform came off?
Well, that took some time, Mike, and the short answer is spirituality, and I try to keep my spirits up. Um, I exercise 4 days a week, go for walks. I can't do as much as I would like to do because I'm not a young guy anymore, you know? I'll be 77 in a few days.
77. I mean, you look like you're in your early 60s. That's mind blowing. You're 77.
Yeah, but I try to eat, I don't eat totally good food, but I eat mostly food that's healthy. And I go for a walk 4 times a week, and I try to keep my spirits up. I try to stay fit spiritually, mentally, and physically. 'Cause once I keep those 3 dimensions of the human body in shape, I'm good to go, you know? But it takes constant work because there's a lot of negativity around also that could infiltrate my thinking, so I just try to ward that stuff off by staying spiritual.
I've been filling out job applications, and one of the questions on there is, "Are you suffering from any of these things?" And it has a litany of things, heart disease, anxiety, PTSD. It just a litany of things, and it's not military specific. It's just,
Mhm.
do you fall in any of these categories? And I thought to myself, why are we trying to paint ourselves into these pictures, or why are we into these corners of judging somebody because they have,
Right,
like I said, obesity or they're a smoker or something along
right.
those questions. And every time I see that PTSD question or I see that anxiety question, I thought, shouldn't we all be able to be resilient
Mhm,
folks that don't
mhm.
have to disclose this type of stuff on our resumes, on our
Yeah,
applications?
yeah, I know, I know. I went to the doctor yesterday, and there were this 4 questions that they asked me, and I was like, "Why? What does this have to do with my medical issues?" You know?
Mhm.
But you're right. As a matter of fact, I was driving a couple of days ago, and I saw this guy. He was overweight. I mean, to a large degree. But I said to myself, God bless him. Maybe he has some other kind of issues going on. So I try to look at it from a brighter side, because every time I see someone that's overweight, it's not just because of eating. They could have some kind of medical issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as well as post-traumatic stress. I was at the VA hospital here in Richmond one day, and this guy was sitting across from me, and the waiting room was kind of crowded. And I could look at him and tell us, man, this guy is suffering from post-traumatic stress. And I said, if anybody says anything to him, he's going to fly off the handle. And sure enough, a lady just asked him a question. He flew off.
Mm.
I understood what he was going through because I was there. I'm still there. I suffer from post-traumatic stress and depression. But I mentioned to you earlier, I just try to get through it by dealing with staying spiritual, deal with it in that manner. And I do believe that everything that has happened to me and is happening for a reason. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking to you, to pass this on to other people that may be in the same situation that I am. Say, hey, look at Clarence has made it the way he is. Maybe I can do it as well. And you can. You just sometimes we just need people to mimic on.
You mentioned spirituality quite a few times, and I know that this leads us into your next chapter of being a firefighter in New York City. Can you explain, do you have any spiritual moments that you can share with us when you were in times of danger, when you were working the firefighter mission in New York City?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, let me just tell you one that happened on September 11th. When I got to the scene, as a matter of fact, I was retired at the time. And I was in Brooklyn. I had a part-time job riding around doing mortgage inspections. And I could look over into Manhattan and I saw this large plume of smoke. And I said to myself, something in fire department jargon, I said, something is cooking over there.
Mm.
And then I heard it on the radio in the car that a plane struck towers. So I headed over. When I got there, I connected with some guys. All of us was coming in off duty and we were extinguishing fires and car fires and ambulance fires around the perimeter. Because the North Tower That was the South Tower had collapsed already. And when the North Tower started collapsing, we heard this loud bang, like something let go. And the other firefighters and myself, we just stared at each other and we heard it again. And instinct told us that the building was collapsing. So we ran. And I'm assuming I ran about 30 feet and I fell and I couldn't get up as quickly as I wanted to because my right shoulder was dislocated, forward dislocation. And I knew I was still in the collapse zone because to be completely out of the collapse zone, you need to be away a distance equal to a height and a half of the structure. And that was a 110-story building. I knew I was nowhere near it, being 100 and being that far away from out of the collapse zone. And I'm on my hands and knees. I'm waiting to die. And it was peaceful and very peaceful. And I thought to myself, I'm going to die just like the 4 firefighters we lost earlier this year. A wall collapsed on them and killed them. I'm waiting for the big piece of metal to hit me. I could hear the tower right in back of me collapsing. And it's a good thing it pancaked because if it had fallen outward, forget about it, I wouldn't be here talking. When the noise stopped from the collapsing building, I got up and the smoke, the dust cloud came over and every breath was suffocating. So I said, okay, Clarence, what are you going to do? Just use your training. I got up from the floor and I got one hand in front of me probing because you can't see anything to make sure I don't walk into anything, and keeping the weight on my back leg like we do when walking in a fire because you can't see anything in a fire also. And I came to a brick wall and it was too tall for me to scale. So I remember moving to my left. It was a shorter wall, brick wall. I managed to scale it. And I looked down about 3 steps and I saw the fire marshal I was working with. And I said to myself, I should have run the way he ran, he don't have any dust on him.
Mm.
And he looked at me, he said, I see you made it. And I said, yeah, you too. And for whatever reason, I felt really stupid at that moment. I don't know why I had this thought. But a chief told me once, he said, Clarence, if you ever fight in a fire in a bar, always try to get close to the bar. This way, if the ceiling falls on you, the bar could protect you.
Mm.
And I had that thought of, why didn't I get close to the bar? This is a 110-story building collapsing. Myself and the firefighter had been taking photos a little earlier using my camera. So I asked him, do you have my camera? So he looked in his turnout coat pocket. That's the one coat behind me with the stripes. So he said, oh no, he said, I dropped it. I was running for my life. So I said, don't worry about it. He was standing in a doorway. That's the doors, the glass doors, the metal bar that you would push to exit the building. And a lot of sunlight was shining through, really bright, bright light. I left him and I'm outside. Then I remembered, I said, I'm wearing my glasses. So I pulled my glasses down over my nose. That allowed me to see, I think it was like 3 or 4 EMS workers coming my way, covered with dust. And they helped me to the ambulance. And again, I started feeling stupid because I know I came to help. And I was a firefighter for a long time. So I know that I had to take people out of service now to help me. But as they put more victims into the ambulance, I felt a little better. So they took me to the hospital and the doctor said, Mr. Singleton, he said, we usually give anesthesia before we reset limbs, but he said, we're expecting a lot of people to come in, which didn't happen. A lot of people didn't come. You lived or you died for the most part. So he said, but we can snap it back into place and you can go see a doctor later. I said to myself, I didn't verbalize, who do you think you're talking to? I'm a Marine fire lieutenant.
I got this.
Yeah, snap it back into place. Next time I think I'll wait for the anesthesia. So in any case, he did. He snapped it back into place, and he said, "You can wash your face in the corner there." And I hadn't seen myself yet, so I went in the corner, sink, splashed some water on my face, and I left. Later, I saw myself in Life magazine. I'm centerfold of Life magazine. I'm covered with dust, and I left the hospital. 2 guys from France saw me, and they came over and talked. And they went into a store and bought me a T-shirt to wear, and I put the T-shirt on, and I went back down to the collapse site. Sometimes later, I don't recall exactly how long, but several help groups was established. And I was in this one group, and I shared the story I just shared with you. And a lady looked at me, and she said, Clarence, she said, I worked down there for 15 years, and there is no walls like the one you described. I have gone back down there several times looking for this wall. It doesn't exist. My son was there my son was there with me once, and I was looking around. He said, "Dad, come on, give it up. You're not going to find it." What the high-powered therapists think is that when I was wounded in Vietnam, I came out of my foxhole, I could say reluctantly. I'll tell you the reason for that reluctance in a little bit. Like the therapists want to think that that was me coming out of my foxhole in Vietnam when I was wounded. And I say reluctant because when I was wounded in Vietnam, there was a lot of us that were wounded, and there were a lot of Marines on the ground rolling in agony. And I didn't want to, when they came to pick me up to take me to 3rd Med, which is a little field hospital, I told them, leave me alone. Don't bother me. Go get the other guys. They paid me no attention. They threw me on a little mule. A mule is just a 4-wheel cart with one guy sits up front and driving. They took me over to 3rd Med. So getting back to the World Trade Center, my pastor, I told him this story, and he said, "Clarence," he said, "that was probably an angel of the Lord." First words out of his mouth was, "I see you made it," like encouragement to me. It was impossible for anybody to be in that area and not have any dust on them. Third, I was wearing my glasses, so I couldn't have seen them. My glasses were covered with dust. Impossible to see them. Fourth, firefighters don't pass each other needing help. I don't care if you're black, pink, white, purple, yellow. We helped each other. And the fire marshal didn't help me, but EMS did. There's something not right with that picture. So I believe that, as a matter of fact, when I first got to the scene, I was walking over to the North Tower, which was still standing, and I heard this clear voice that said, "Stay here, Clarence, and work with these guys." That's when we were extinguishing the ambulance fires, et cetera, around the perimeter. So that's my little spiritual piece. And one other thing, lastly, I wasn't sure if I was dead or alive. It seemed as if I should have been dead because I was so close to the collapse area. I used to ask my friends, "Am I dead or alive?" And they said, "Clarence, we assure you, you are alive." So,
One thing that I think our listeners perhaps missed in your compelling story is that you were a retired firefighter.
mhm,
You were not on duty.
no,
You were not sleeping in your bunk in the building.
mhm,
What compelled a retired firefighter that is not being called,
mhm,
who's not getting that 911 radio transmission?
mhm.
What compelled you to go to those buildings that day?
Again, I retired from the New York City Fire Department August 30th of 2000, and firefighting and helping people was just still a part of me. I could not, I mean, I just felt compelled to go. I was going one way or the other. I mean, I had to get there if I had to crawl. And also it would give me the opportunity to help others. And my intention was, okay, I could get there. I know I can't go into to the building. I don't have my fire uniform, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I can change the cylinders for the guys who are going in and out, And I was going to check in with the chief and just let him know, use me in any way you want, chief. As a matter of fact, Chief Yancey, who worked in my battalion before he became chief of the department, he perished at the site of the World Trade Center. And another good friend of mine, Father Michael Judge, he was the fire department's chaplain. He wasn't the first one that perished, but he got the first death certificate. And we were very close friends. Mhm.
What do you think people who didn't live through 9/11 struggle to understand?
I think that, I used to say to myself, this is during and right after the collapse of the World Trade Center. I said, you watch, we go back to business as usual in no time at all. And it happened. I guess maybe because of my military experience, because I had gone back to the World Trade Center since actually, what I'm doing now is I'm mixing the 1993 bombing
Mm.
with the collapse on September 11th. But as a matter of fact,
Tell us
yeah,
about this
that's a good
1993
point.
bombing. A
Yeah,
lot of people, younger kids these days were born after 9/11, so
right,
they're only reading about it or hearing it through the stories you're sharing. So they definitely are not
right,
familiar with what happened in 1993. Please share.
right, yeah. Well, what I was about to allude to was that in 1993, when the World Trade Center was bombed, I responded. And as a matter of fact, I'm smiling because in the firehouse, we go out, we buy lunch, we cook lunch and dinner. This particular day, after coming back from buying dinner, there's a Spanish restaurant. I love Spanish food. So that day I got some like probably smothered pork chop or smothered chicken, beans, and rice. So when the guys were cooking their meal and the bells sounded, I laughed at them. I said, man, I said, I hope this fire's in the basement because I'm too heavy to walk up any stairs. I can only go down. So when we got there, the chief is standing outside. We reported to him, and he said, 12th truck, that was the unit I was with. He said, I want you guys to go up and search the 54th through the 58th floors. When I say truck company, I was with the ladder. Most people probably know it as hook and ladder. And then you got your engine. These are the guys with the water. We call them engines. We started walking up, all of our gear, and we took the short side of the stair. We still on the inside, and civilians were coming down. All we could see was legs coming down, you know. And we got to the 44th floor. Some civilian came out and told us there was a young lady in on the floor having trouble. As a matter of fact, that's Geraldine there, Gerald and her friend Donna. And so we went in, and Geraldine was pregnant. She looks pretty stable at the time. So because I had a handy-talkie radio, the lieutenant said, Clarence, you stay with her and we're going to go up and finish doing the searches. So when they left, Geraldine started convulsioning. And her lifelong friend, Donna, is kneeling over her about to cry. So I said, did this ever happen to her before? So crying, she said, no. So I tried to get on the handy-talkie and try to call the troops back. My transmission, what happens with handy-talkies is the handy-talkies that we use don't transmit for long distances because if there's a fire down the street, we'll be interfering.
Sure.
But the chief's handy-talkie, they can transmit for miles. So I said, okay. I reached for the phone. I was going to call the dispatch and tell her, hey, get the guys back here. And so I said, let me try it one more time. So I got on the handy-talkie and I said, told the guys what happened. They hurried me this time. They came back. And we took Geraldine down to the 34th floor in a chair. We did a chair carry. I'm smiling because there's something I told Gerald. I told the guys, I don't know if I can't remember if I was on the front 2 legs or the back, but I said, Gerald, the chair was scraping the stairs. I told the guys, I said, raise the legs. And Geraldine started to raising her legs. And I can't say everything I said. I was very rude to her because I wanted to make her so angry. And she was in bad shape. I wanted to make her so angry, she would say, I'm going to the hospital, but I'm going to make sure I get out because I want to come look for this firefighter, give him a piece of my mind.
Not those legs, the chair legs.
Yeah. But Geraldine didn't make it out of the hospital. We're still friends today. As a matter of fact, Geraldine had the baby. They did a cesarean section. She had a medical condition called eclampsia. Her body was expelling the baby. But the baby is Meredith, and Meredith is now, that was 1993, so you can do the math. And she graduated from Rutgers University in New Jersey, and she's so smart. She asked her mom, am I a nerd?
Yeah.
So, yes. But in any case, I was supposed to walk her down the aisle, but during that period, her marriage, during the marriage, well, the day she was supposed to be married, I was invited to Arizona to speak at 2 schools, but I did send her a nice gift. And but we've been friends ever since. And that was the 1993 bombing. So when I was about to share the year before, I kind of confused the two, the collapse of September 11 and the bombing. But not many people perished during the 1993 bombing. I don't want to give the number because I don't want to give false information, but it wasn't a lot, nothing compared to September 11. But I do believe even me being in Vietnam, the 1993 bombing, and the collapse, it was all for a purpose. Because that's when I became an author and I put all the stuff in my book and it's out there helping people, you know. I give more books away than I sell. This as long as it's out there helping people. As a matter of fact, here in Richmond, Virginia, where I live now, well, I'm in Midlothian, it's a suburb of Richmond. I used to frequent a store, this young lady, she would smile at me and I said to myself, why, old man, you still got it.
Yeah.
But one day I went into the store and she said, if I give you a letter, would you read it? I said, of course. And one day I went in and she handed me this letter. I still have it amongst my mobilia collectibles. She said that she wasn't able to ride in cars. She had jumped out of moving cars before, but she said after reading my story, she was able to actually get in a car and ride to the beach with her parents. And that's why I keep sharing my story. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, and just to help others, you know?
At what point did you realize that it was time to write this book? The Heart of a Hero is the name of your book. At what point did you realize, okay, I got to start putting some of this stuff down?
My friends, a lot of them, almost all of them, they said to me for a long period of time, maybe a couple of years, Clarence, you've done a lot. Why don't you write a book? And again, I didn't verbalize it, but I said to myself, write a book for what? You live, you go through hardships, then you die. And I was at church one Sunday morning, and the pastor was preaching. I don't remember what the sermon was about, but then it dawned on me. I said, Clarence, you can write a book and put your experiences in it, and you could help people that way.
Mm.
After the service was over, I went to the pastor and I said, hey, I found my purpose. I
Yeah.
found my purpose. So that's how the book came about.
Your book talks a lot about heroism. Do you believe heroism is innate or do you believe it's forged?
I think that that we don't really know until something actually happens. And I think that there's something else in us that takes over once a situation come about. I know I have done some things, Mike, in Vietnam that never thought I would do,
Mm.
until that moment came about. I think that all of us has the ability to do things that are outstanding, but you just have to wait to that moment, and all depends on what gives you the strength. And God would, I was about to say, whether it's God or something else, but God has to be playing a role in it to get us to move in the first place, because we get these subtle voices, at least in my case, that tells me what to do. And like even in Vietnam, I've had some save some guys, and there was no, I don't know how I could think that fast,
Hmm.
but it just happens. So that's my spiel on.
I have a lot of those experiences with my own spouse dealing with extremely stressful environments. And she says there's this switch that flips in you and you just become a completely different person.
Hmm.
Your emotion, everything just falls to the wayside and you become completely directive
Hmm.
about solving the problem. And a specific event I can think of, once again, pales in comparison to the stories you're sharing, but we were in New York City and we were staying in a hotel room and she's claustrophobic.
Hmm.
We're in the elevator. It's a smaller elevator than what you're typically used to. So let's say it
Hmm.
holds about four people before you get pretty uncomfortable. So we got four people in this elevator. My wife's getting nervous, kind of whispering to me about how tight it is. Lo and behold, the elevator fails at a half level, if you will.
Hmm.
She starts just perspiring like I've never seen, that clammy, pale look. And I immediately put my hands on her shoulders and said, sit down now. It's going to be fine. There's plenty of oxygen in here. You can breathe,
Hmm.
but you need to sit down because she was ready to pass out.
Hmm.
And so here I am working with the other man, his wife, a man and wife, and I was working with the other man. I said, first we got to see if we can talk to the firefighters through the helpline, through the phone that's in there. Otherwise, we got to pry these doors open, right, and climb out. And so that's exactly what happened. It was an older, much older building, and so either the comm system didn't work for firefighters or something along those lines.
Hmm.
So we had to pry the doors open and
Hmm.
climb out that halfway.
Right.
And she just said, you just completely became a different person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
Hmm.
there's some of us,
Yeah.
right, that panic and look to others for that help.
Hmm.
And then there's some of us that say, here I am. I'm going to solve this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I know many times I was thinking about a job we had, I was thinking about yesterday, or maybe this morning as I was out walking. We had a fire in the old Chelsea Hotel in Manhattan. It used to be a famous hotel years ago. As a matter of fact, it was the hotel after the market crashed in 1929 when people were jumping to their death.
Mm.
I don't remember what floor the fire was on, but it was on one of the upper floors. It was high enough for me to drive I'll put it in layman's term and say cherry picker.
Mhm.
To us, it's a tower ladder. I drove it to the balcony and I could see the fire burning in the apartment. And I said to myself, I know I'm not going to be able to see the doorway, the entrance door, but I'll hear the guys banging, forcing their way in, the firefighters forcing their way in through the entrance door. But my timing was off because when I got out of the bucket of the tower ladder, I tried to walk in, the door was too small. Tried to go sideways, it was too small. So I took my axe and just crushed the door. And I could see the fire roaring. I said, I got to get in there quick to look for victims. And I did. But now I can't see the door because of the smoke.
Mm.
And because my timing was off, I didn't hear them forcing the door. So I just yelled, three, because I know Engine 3 would be at the door. They opened the door and I came running out. I never lived that one down because they would say, we heard this voice. We couldn't make it in after we forced the door. There was too much fire. And we opened the door and Clarence came running out. But that was to go in to see if I could save someone, save someone's life.
What responsibility do we have to remember, not just honor those moments like Vietnam and 9/11?
The question was,
What responsibility do we have to remember, not just to honor these historical moments in our nation's history, but what responsibility do we have to remember these moments?
I think that especially for whether it's firefighters or military personnel or civilians, whomever, when they do things like this, like fighting in Vietnam or World War II, World War One, or police officers, et cetera, I think it's our duty to keep the memory of them alive. And I've always said this because it's my belief that we don't truly perish until we stop being remembered.
Mm.
And that's why I try to keep the memory of the people gals and guys who have perished alive. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I mentioned to you, I was, when I came to Virginia, I became a member of the Freedom Flag Foundation. That's a flag in remembrance of September 11. So that kind of keeps me still doing work to keep the memory of all of my friends alive. We lost some really good guys in the New York City Fire Department on September 11. I mean, I've seen some guys do things that was unbelievable. I saw, it was a U-shaped building, and I'm in one portion of the U, and I could look across. I was probably on the floor a little higher than the fire was, but I could look across and I see this fire burning in this room. And I saw these yellow stripes on the coat like this crawling under the flame. And when I got outside, I was talking to these guys. I said, I saw this firefighter crawling underneath the flame. And one of the captains said, that was me.
Oh.
But it's the thing that these guys do is one guy, he couldn't make it down the hall. It was too much flames. And he literally took the door off of an apartment to protect himself so he could push down the hall through the flames to go into an apartment to rescue. So these guys do things that you just wouldn't believe. I don't like talking about myself much, but they're amazing, some of them. Mhm.
Well, in closing, I do have to ask you to talk about yourself here. When your story is remembered, what do you hope defines it?
Actually, I would like my story just to carry the message of love and to treat everyone at least human, civil. I cannot sit here and tell you, Mike, that I love and like everybody, but I can tolerate them. I can accept them. I don't have to criticize them or belittle them.
Mhm.
And what that does for me is causes me and allows me to feel better about myself. Because I've noticed that even, and sometimes I have little snipes with people and I feel so bad afterwards. So that weighs on me. But when I'm helping, then I have another feeling. It's a good feeling. Oh, look what I did for this person. And so I think that just sharing a little love goes a long, 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 long ways.
The golden rule. I mean, I just wish there were more that live by that, like yourself,
Mhm.
right? We all have differences.
Mhm. Yeah.
I get into not arguments, but debates with people that I disagree with, but I still say to them, hey, we all still go to the same church. We
Yeah.
all believe in the
Yeah.
same moral values.
Mhm.
We can agree to disagree and still love
Right.
one another
Right.
and break bread on another
Right.
day.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's becoming more rare. And now we've,
Mhm.
in, you know, put ourselves in these foxholes,
Mhm.
to carry on to your example earlier. where you're either in my foxhole or you're not.
Right.
Like, why are we doing this to one another? We need to come back together. And sadly, I hope it doesn't take another 9/11 for something like that to bring us together.
Exactly.
So before we close, I want to pause on what your story really gives us. It's easy to talk about heroes in hindsight, to attach labels, medals, and moments. But what Clarence reminds us is that valor isn't something you put on or what the camera provides. It's something you carry long before and long after. The world is watching, from Vietnam to decades in the fire service to a morning when there was no orders, no uniforms, no obligation, only a choice. Clarence stepped forward. That's the heart of what Voice for Valor exists to preserve. Not the noise, not the spectacle, but the quiet decisions made by ordinary people when walking away would have been easier, safer, or more comfortable. Valor does not always roar. Sometimes it shows up early, sometimes it stays late, sometimes it lives with a cost and keeps going anyway. At Voice for Valor, we believe these stories matter, not to glorify the past, but to challenge the present, to remind us that service isn't reserved for a select few. It's available to anyone willing to choose responsibility over convenience. Clarence Singleton didn't tell his story to be remembered. He told it so we would remember what's possible. Clarence, thank you for your service, your honesty, and your courage.
Thank you, Mike. It's been an honor.
Absolutely.
I really love being on your show. Thank you.
Yes, sir.